Before this supper ends, every soul in this church will wish they had taken the empty chair beside her. Maya Chino sat alone beneath the dim light of an oil lamp, while 80 townspeople filled the long tables around her with talk, laughter, and the scrape of silverware against tin plates. The church hall smelled of roasted beef, corn bread, pine smoke, and wet wool carried in from the cold November night. Yet around Maya's table, the air felt untouched. Still, almost forbidden. She wore a plain brown dress beneath a dark woven shawl, and her black hair was tied neatly at the nape of her neck. Nothing about her invited trouble. Nothing except the fact that she was Apache, and everyone in Mercy Ridge knew it. 2 empty chairs stood across from her when she arrived. Martha Whitcomb removed the first before the prayer. She carried it to the table where the church elders sat, though there were already more chairs than men. The second remained only because no one had found a reason to take it yet. Maya placed both hands around a small cloth pouch resting beside her plate. The fabric was gray with age and marked by a faint streak of soot. She had walked nearly 30 miles to bring it here. She had crossed cold ground, slept beneath cedar branches, and entered a town where every face turned toward her before quickly turning away. But she had not come for their food. The serving woman passed her table without stopping. A boy carrying a basket of cornbread slowed near Maya, then looked toward his mother. The woman gave the smallest shake of her head. The boy moved on. Maya lowered her eyes, not from shame, but to keep the room from seeing how carefully she watched everything. Reverend Bell stood near the stove, speaking too loudly about fellowship, though he never once looked toward the table by the kitchen door. Then the outer door opened. Cold wind swept through the hall, bending the lamp flames and carrying a ribbon of dust across the floorboards. Silas Reed stepped inside with his hat in one hand and the long trail still clinging to his coat. He was tall, lean, and quiet in the way of men who spent more time beneath open sky than under a roof. Conversation softened as he crossed the room. Martha Whitcomb smiled and pointed toward an open place beside the elders. Silas did not follow her hand. His gaze moved past the crowded tables and settled on Maya. For one long second, no one breathed loud enough to be noticed. Then he walked to her table, pulled the remaining chair back, and rested his hand on its worn wooden frame. "Save me a seat at your table," he said. Maya looked up at him. Her dark eyes held neither gratitude nor relief, only caution sharpened by experience. Around them, forks stopped moving. Martha's smile vanished. Silas waited. Maya's fingers tightened around the soot-stained pouch. "You may not want it," she said softly, "when they learn why I came." Silas glanced at the untouched plate before her, then at the people pretending not to listen. He removed his coat, placed it over the chair, and sat down. "Then I reckon they ought to listen carefully." Beneath Maya's hand, something hard shifted inside the pouch. Something silver, something burned, and something bearing the name of Silas Reed's father. Maya watched Silas reach for the water pitcher, but he did not fill his own cup first. He poured for her, then set the pitcher between them as if the gesture required no explanation. Across the hall, conversation returned in thin, careful strands, though every voice carried the strain of people speaking while listening elsewhere. Martha Whitcomb moved from table to table with a serving spoon in hand, offering gravy to men whose plates were already full. She never came near Maya. Silas tore a piece of cornbread and placed half on the edge of Maya's plate. "You walked far," he said. Maya studied the dust dried along the seams of his coat. "So did you." Cattle strayed north of Dry Creek. Mine was a different kind of errand. Her hand remained over the gray pouch. Silas did not ask her to open it. That mattered more than she expected. Most men in Mercy Ridge asked questions as if an answer belonged to them. He only took a bite and waited. Near the stove, Ezra Pike leaned toward Reverend Bell and whispered something that made the old preacher's shoulders stiffen. Ezra was a narrow man in a black vest, with polished boots too clean for the season and a silver watch chain bright against his chest. He owned the bank, half the grazing notes in the county, and enough favors to make people call fear good judgment. At last he crossed the room. His steps were quiet, but the hall seemed to make space for them. "Read," he said, stopping beside the table. "There is room with the elders." Silas looked at the empty place across from Maya. "There is room here." Ezra's eyes shifted to her. This supper was arranged for the families of this congregation. Maya lifted her gaze. Then perhaps your congregation should decide whether a hungry traveler counts as human before it decides whether she counts as family. A spoon struck a plate somewhere behind them. Reverend Bell lowered his head. Ezra smiled, though no warmth entered it. You speak boldly for a guest. I was not invited. Silas set down his fork. Neither was I. You belong here. That sounds different from being welcome. The words landed softly, and that made them heavier. Ezra's jaw tightened. He looked toward the pouch beneath Maya's hand. What did you bring into this church? Maya felt the old warning rise inside her, the one that had followed her through trading posts, ranch gates, and every doorway where silence could turn against her. She could have closed her fingers around the pouch and left. She could have carried the truth back into the cold and let Mercy Ridge keep its clean story. Instead, she loosened the drawstring. A faint smell of ash rose between them. Silas stopped breathing for half a second. Maya reached inside and drew out a silver spoon darkened by fire, its handle bent slightly near the base. One letter remained visible beneath the soot. An R. Silas stared at it, as if the room had fallen away. Where did you get that? He asked. Maya placed the spoon on the table between them. From the mission at Cedar Hollow. The color left his face. Cedar Hollow had burned 18 years earlier, on the same night his father never came home. Maya met his eyes and spoke so quietly that only the nearest tables heard. Your father was there. Silas looked at the spoon, then at the pouch still holding whatever else she had carried 30 miles to deliver. They said he died saving people. Maya's expression did not change. He did save people. Then she turned the spoon over, revealing 3 scratched words beneath the blackened silver. They were not a prayer. They were a warning. Silas turned the spoon toward the lamp. The scratched words were shallow, nearly hidden beneath the soot. Pike knows the spring. For the first time that evening, Ezra Pike lost control of his face. It lasted only a moment, but Maya saw it. So did Silas. Around them, the church supper continued in fragments. A chair creaked. A child whispered. Someone near the back cleared his throat and received no answer. Silas lifted his eyes from the spoon. What spring? Ezra gave a small laugh. A burned spoon and 3 scratched words are not evidence of anything. Maya drew the pouch closer. Then you should not be troubled by them. Ezra's smile returned, thin and polished. I am troubled by strangers bringing old grief into a peaceful room. Peaceful, Maya repeated. Her gaze moved over the crowded tables, the untouched food before her, and the chair Martha Whitcomb had taken away. That is one word for it. Silas leaned forward, his forearms resting on the table. You knew my father was at Cedar Hollow. Ezra looked at him with practiced patience. Everyone knew. Jonah Reed went there after smoke was seen from the ridge. Did he know about the spring? There are springs all over this country. Not like this one, Maya said. She reached into the pouch again and removed a folded scrap of paper, dark at the edges and stiff with age. She did not unfold it. Not yet. Ezra's eyes fixed on it. Silas noticed. You recognize that too? He asked. Ezra's hand drifted toward his watch chain, then stopped. I recognize a performance when I see one. Then sit down, Silas said. The room grew still again. Ezra looked at the empty chair across from Maya, as though it had become something dangerous. I have no reason to sit at this table. Neither did I, Silas replied, until I heard my father's name. Reverend Bell stepped away from the stove. Ezra, he said quietly, perhaps we should hear what she came to say. Martha turned sharply toward him, but the old preacher did not look away this time. Ezra's expression hardened. This woman comes from people claiming land west of Cedar Hollow. Whatever story she tells will serve that claim. Maya's voice remained calm. I came with a name, a spoon, and a promise made to a dying woman. Silas looked at her. What woman? Maya met his eyes. Your mother. The words seemed to empty the air from the hall. Silas sat back slowly. The last time he had seen Eleanor Reed, she had been wrapped in quilts beside the cabin window, too weak to speak above a whisper. She had told him there were things his father had tried to set right. Things Silas must not hate him for. He had believed fever was confusing her. Now Maya placed the folded paper beside the spoon. Eleanor gave this to my aunt 12 years ago, she said. She asked that it reach you only when someone from Cedar Hollow could speak the truth beside it. Silas glanced toward Ezra. And you came tonight because he would be here. I came because everyone would be here. That answer moved through the room more sharply than any accusation. Ezra stepped closer. You expect us to trust a paper kept in an Apache camp for 18 years. Maya finally unfolded it. The paper carried Ezra Reed's signature and the seal of the Territorial Land Office. Beneath them was a survey marking one spring, one mission, and 40 acres Ezra Pike had spent years calling his own. Silas read the final line twice. Then he looked at Maya. This says the water belongs to the families who survived Cedar Hollow. Maya nodded. Your father found the record before the fire. Silas turned toward Ezra. And you knew? Ezra said nothing. Outside, the wind pressed against the church walls. Inside, Maya placed one finger on the final sentence of the document. But this is not why your father died, she said. He died because he learned what you planned to do with the water. Ezra Pike looked at the paper as though silence might erase the ink. It did not. The church hall held 80 people, yet the only sound was the low hiss of pine in the stove. Silas kept both hands flat on the table. Anger moved through him, but he did not rise. Maya noticed that. Tell me, he said, what was the plan? Ezra glanced toward Reverend Bell, then toward Martha Whitcomb, searching for the old shelter of familiar faces. Neither spoke. Maya folded the document once, carefully, along a crease worn pale by years. Cedar Hollow sat above the only spring that ran through every dry season, she said. Families from the mission used it. Ranchers farther east depended on it when their wells failed. Your father learned that Mr. Pike intended to redirect the flow through a private ditch and charge every household for access. A murmur passed through the room. It began at the tables nearest the stove and traveled slowly toward the back wall. Several men looked at Ezra differently now. Not with outrage. With memory. Silas recalled summers when Pike's wagons had sold barrels of water at prices no poor family could afford. He had never asked where it came from. My father found the survey, Silas said, and tried to bring it here. Maya nodded. He also found the mission ledger. It listed every family with a legal claim to the spring. Ezra finally spoke. A ledger written by missionaries is not a territorial deed. No, Maya said. That is why he went to the land office. She touched the seal on the paper. He returned with this. Ezra's jaw tightened. Then why was it hidden for 18 years? Maya looked toward the soot-darkened spoon. Because the woman who carried it out of Cedar Hollow believed the town would take it from her. Reverend Bell drew a slow breath. Who was she? Maya answered without looking away from Ezra. My aunt, Lena Chino. The name stirred another whisper. Older faces recognized it. Martha's serving spoon lowered to her side. She worked at the mission kitchen, Maya continued. Ezra Reed placed the deed inside a flour sack and told her to leave by the north trail. He stayed behind to find the ledger. Silas stared at the scratched warning. Pike knows the spring. Those were the last words he carved before he handed her the spoon. Ezra stepped closer to the table. You have a story. Nothing more. Maya's expression remained still. Then let us read the letter. Silas turned to her. My mother's letter? Yes. She reached into the pouch and removed a second folded sheet, cleaner than the first, but yellowed at the edges. Eleanor Reed met my aunt years later. She had spent that time gathering names, dates, receipts, and statements from families who bought water they already owned. She did not ask me to bring only proof. She asked me to bring witnesses. Maya lifted her eyes toward the crowded hall. That is why I came during supper. Ezra looked around and understood the trap at last. Every rancher he had charged. Every widow he had denied credit. Every church elder who had praised his generosity after he donated a fraction of what he collected. They were all there. Silas reached for the letter, but Maya kept one hand upon it. Before you read this, she said, you must understand something. What? Your father was not the only person protecting the truth. She looked toward Reverend Bell. The old preacher's face had gone pale. Someone in this church has carried the rest of it for 18 years. Reverend Bell did not move. The lamp beside him threw a weak gold line across his face, catching the moisture at his temples. Silas watched the old man with a stillness that felt heavier than anger. What did you keep? He asked. Bell looked toward Ezra, then toward the congregation he had served for 23 years. A book, he said. The words came thin at first. The mission ledger. Martha Whitcomb closed her eyes. Somewhere near the back, a bench groaned as a rancher shifted his weight. Ezra's voice sharpened. Amos, be careful. Bell looked at him then. I have been careful for 18 years. He crossed to the small cabinet beside the pulpit, removed a brass key from beneath his collar, and opened the lower door. From behind a stack of hymnals, he drew out a narrow leather book wrapped in linen. Dust lay along its spine. The room seemed to lean toward it. Bell carried the ledger to Maya's table and placed it beside the spoon. "Lena Chino brought this to me 3 days after the fire," he said. She was frightened. "I told her I would keep it safe until the territory sent an honest judge." Maya's eyes did not leave him. No judge came. 2 came. Both stayed at Pike's house. Ezra gave a bitter laugh. "You expect them to believe that?" Bell opened the ledger. Names filled the pages in careful black ink. Apache families, mission workers, settlers who had contributed money to maintain the spring. Beside each name stood a mark showing a shared claim to the water. On the final page was Jonah Reed's signature, followed by Bell's own. Silas looked at the preacher. "You signed this." Bell nodded. "I witnessed the agreement. And then you preached every Sunday while Pike sold that water." Bell lowered his eyes. "Yes." The answer carried no excuse. "Only wait." Silas pushed his chair back an inch. Maya placed her hand lightly against the table, not touching him, but stopping the moment from breaking loose. "Do not give him what he expects," she said. Silas looked at Ezra. "What does he expect? For your anger to become louder than the truth." Ezra folded his arms. "Listen to her, Reed. She came here to turn you against your own people." Maya's gaze remained steady. "Your people are the ones who tell you the truth when it costs them something." That silenced the room. Silas looked down at her hand near his, separated by no more than the width of a silver dollar. He remembered how she had entered alone, how she had carried proof through 30 miles of cold country, and how she had never once asked him to defend her. She had asked only that he listen. He drew a slow breath and pulled his chair forward again. "Read the letter," he said. Maya released the folded page beneath her palm. Silas opened it carefully. Eleanor Reed's handwriting slanted across the paper, faint but unmistakable. She wrote of Jonah's search for the ledger, of Pike's private ditch, and of Reverend Bell's fear. But the final lines were not about land. They were about Maya. Eleanor wrote that a young Apache woman would one day carry the truth into Mercy Ridge, and that Silas must judge her by the burden she bore, not the blood in her veins. He stopped reading. Maya looked toward the cold plate before her. "Your mother believed you would listen." Silas folded the letter along its old crease. "She knew me better than I knew myself." Then he lifted the serving bowl Martha had left on a distant table, carried it back, and filled Maya's plate before his own. One by one, people began leaving their seats to see the ledger. Ezra watched them gather around the table he had wanted empty. And for the first time in Mercy Ridge, he stood alone. The first man to reach the table was Samuel Hart, a widower whose well had failed 3 summers earlier. He bent over the ledger, traced his finger down the page, and found his name beside a payment he did not remember agreeing to. Then came the Miller brothers, both carrying receipts from Ezra Pike's office. A seamstress named Ruth Cole unfolded a water bill from her apron pocket. One by one, the pieces gathered. Paper, memory, silence. Ezra stood near the center aisle, watching the room change without him. "Old records can be misunderstood," he said. "Debts were collected. Roads were maintained. Wells were repaired." Samuel Hart looked up. "You charged me $12 for water that already belonged to my family." Ezra spread his hands. "And you received it." Maya turned a page in the ledger. "Receiving what is yours does not make the taking honest." Silas remained seated beside her. He could feel the anger in the room rising, but Maya's calm held it in place. That was when he understood what she had been protecting from the beginning. Not Ezra, not the church, the truth itself. Anger could scatter it. Pride could bury it again. She would not allow either. Reverend Bell read the names aloud from the first page. Apache families, mission families, settlers. Each name sounded different in his mouth than it had on paper. More human, more difficult to ignore. When he finished, Maya placed Jonah Reed's deed beside the ledger and Eleanor's letter beside that. 3 objects, 3 witnesses. Enough to break a lie that had lasted 18 years. Ezra looked toward the door. Martha Whitcomb moved before he did. She carried no authority except the one she had borrowed from custom, yet she stepped into the aisle and stood between him and the cold night outside. "You told us the mission records were lost," she said. Ezra's expression hardened. "Move aside, Martha." She did not. "You told me my husband's debt was lawful." "It was." "Then sit down and prove it." Her voice trembled, but she remained where she was. Silas rose slowly and pulled the empty chair across from Maya away from the table. The wooden legs scraped over the floorboards, a plain sound that seemed louder than the church bell. He turned the chair toward Ezra. "No one is asking for a confession," Silas said. "Just the truth." Ezra laughed once, without humor. From an Apache woman, a frightened preacher, and a cowboy who cannot think beyond his father's name? Maya met his stare. "My people did not carry this proof for 18 years so that you could reduce it to me." She looked around the hall. "Everyone here has a piece of what happened. That is why the lie survived. Each person thought his piece was too small." Ruth Cole laid her receipt beside the deed. Samuel added his. Then the Miller brothers. Soon the table was covered with folded bills, loan notes, and water permits bearing Ezra's signature. The empty chair waited before them. Ezra's eyes moved across the evidence, then to the faces of people who had once lowered their voices when he entered a room. He saw no anger he could provoke, no threat he could condemn, only patience. That frightened him more. He sat. The chair creaked beneath his weight. Reverend Bell opened the ledger to the final page. "Start with Cedar Hollow," he said. Ezra looked at Maya, perhaps expecting triumph. She showed none. She broke a piece of cornbread, placed half beside Silas's plate, and waited with everyone else for the man who had owned the room to begin speaking. Ezra kept his eyes on the ledger. For several seconds, he said nothing. The church stove settled with a soft pop, and somewhere outside, a horse shifted against its hitching rail. "Cedar Hollow was failing," he began. "The mission owed money. The families had no means to maintain the spring." Maya watched him without blinking. "So you decided they did not deserve it." Ezra's fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. "I decided the water needed management." Samuel Hart gave a low, bitter breath. Ezra continued before anyone could interrupt. He admitted purchasing the eastern ditch under another man's name. He admitted collecting fees while the original deed remained unrecorded. He admitted telling the territorial clerk that the Cedar Hollow families had abandoned their claim. Each sentence came slower than the last. No one shouted. That was the punishment he had not prepared for. They simply listened. Silas looked toward the blackened spoon. "And my father?" Ezra raised his eyes at last. "Jonah found the survey in my office. He believed sharing the spring would keep the valley peaceful." "Would it have?" Silas asked. Ezra glanced around the room. "Perhaps. That is not an answer." Maya's voice stayed low. "It is the only honest one he has given." Ezra swallowed. He explained that Jonah had taken the deed to Cedar Hollow, hoping Reverend Bell and the mission families would send it to the territorial court. When the mission burned, Ezra assumed the record had disappeared with everything else. He never knew Lena Chino had carried it away. "You built your fortune on that assumption," Martha said. Ezra did not deny it. Reverend Bell closed the ledger. "The deed recognizes the surviving Cedar Hollow families as the lawful stewards of the spring." Every face turned toward Maya. Ruth Cole looked frightened. "Then the water belongs to your people." Maya nodded. "It does." The words passed through the hall like a winter draft. Men who had spent years depending on that spring began calculating distance, cattle, children, and empty wells. Ezra saw their fear and reached for it. "You understand now," he said. "She can close the ditch by sunrise. Every ranch within 15 miles will feel it." Silas looked at Maya, but he did not ask what she intended. He had learned enough that evening to wait. Maya folded her hands before her. "The families at Cedar Hollow did not send me here to close the spring." Ezra's expression changed. "Then what do they want?" The truth entered into the church record. Every name restored. Every false debt canceled. The spring placed under a council with equal voices from both communities. Samuel stared at her. "You would still share the water?" Water does not ask what language a thirsty child speaks. No one moved. The offer was larger than mercy and quieter than revenge. Silas studied her face in the lamplight. She had crossed 30 miles carrying enough proof to strip Mercy Ridge of its most precious resource. Yet she had come offering terms that would keep every household alive. Ezra looked down at the receipts covering the table. "And what becomes of me?" Maya slid the empty plate toward him. "That is for the law and the people you charged." Then she lifted the spoon and wiped a little soot from the letter R with the corner of her shawl. "My part was to return what was stolen without becoming like the man who stole it." Reverend Bell opened the church record book. One by one, he began writing the forgotten names. Silas moved his hand closer to Maya's on the tabletop. leaving just enough space for her to choose. After a moment, she closed that space herself. Reverend Bell wrote until the scratching of his pen became the only sound in the hall. He entered the names slowly, one beneath another, speaking each aloud before the ink touched paper. Lena Chino, Jonah Reed, the mission families, the ranchers who had paid twice for the same water. No one hurried him. Even Ezra remained seated, though the authority had gone out of his posture. Martha gathered the receipts from the table and arranged them by date. Ruth Cole brought more lamp oil. Samuel Hart carried the church record closer to the light. What had begun as one empty table had become the center of the room. Silas kept his hand beside Maya's, their fingers resting close without pressing. It was not a promise. Not yet. It was something quieter. A choice made visible. When Bell finished the final name, he turned the book around so Maya could read it. "Is anything missing?" he asked. She examined the page. The room waited. Her eyes moved over every line, then stopped near the bottom. One name. Bell looked down. "Whose?" Maya lifted the blackened spoon. "Eleanor Reed." Silas turned toward her. "My mother was not at Cedar Hollow that night." "No," Maya said. "But she spent 12 years keeping the truth alive after everyone else decided silence was safer." Bell nodded once and added her name. Silas lowered his eyes. The grief that crossed his face was brief, but Maya saw it. She moved her hand until the side of her smallest finger touched his. He did not look at her. He did not need to. Ezra rose from the chair. No one blocked him now. "You have what you wanted," he said. Maya looked at the open record. "Not yet." Ezra stopped. Reverend Bell closed the ink bottle. "Tomorrow morning, we will send copies of the deed, ledger, and receipts to the county judge." Samuel Hart stepped forward. "And the water council?" "Chosen before sundown tomorrow," Bell replied. "Half from Mercy Ridge, half from Cedar Hollow." Ezra looked around for one last objection. None came. The people who had once followed his voice now studied the evidence instead. He took his coat from the wall and walked out into the cold. The door closed behind him without ceremony. No one watched for long. Martha lifted the serving bowl and brought it to Maya's table. She filled Maya's plate herself, then placed the spoon down with care. "The food is cold," she said. Maya looked at her. Cold food still feeds a person. Martha's mouth tightened, as if an apology had reached her lips but did not yet know how to leave. She pulled over the chair she had taken earlier and sat at the far end of the table. Then Ruth joined her. Samuel followed. Within minutes, the tables around the room began to empty as people carried their plates toward Maya. One chair became 4 became 12. Soon there was not enough space, and the congregation pushed the long tables together until no one sat apart. Silas watched Maya take her first bite of supper. "Was it worth 30 miles?" he asked. She considered the question. "Ask me after tomorrow. Will you stay?" "Until the council is formed." "And after that?" Maya glanced at the place where their hands still touched. "That depends." "On what?" A faint smile reached her eyes. "Whether Mercy Ridge remembers what it learned after the lamps go out." Outside, the wind moved across the valley and down toward Cedar Hollow. Inside, for the first time that night, every chair was filled by choice. By morning, the wind had cleared the clouds from Mercy Ridge, leaving the sky pale and wide above the church. The council met before noon. 3 members came from town. 3 came from Cedar Hollow. Maya sat between them with the deed, the ledger, and Eleanor Reed's letter laid neatly on the table. Silas stood near the window, not because anyone had asked him to guard the room, but because leaving felt impossible. Every decision was entered into the church record. The false debts would be canceled. The spring would remain open to every family within 15 miles. Maintenance would be shared. No man would own the water again. When Reverend Bell read the agreement aloud, no one cheered. The words were too heavy for celebration. They belonged to people who had waited 18 years to hear them spoken honestly. Ezra Pike did not attend. His office remained closed, its curtains drawn. By sunset, the first copy of the evidence was sealed for the county judge. The second went with Maya to Cedar Hollow. The third stayed beneath the church pulpit, where silence had once hidden the truth and would now be forced to protect it. Maya remained in Mercy Ridge for 3 more weeks. She helped measure the ditch, counted the households, and corrected names that had been written carelessly for years. Silas found reasons to be nearby. A loose wagon wheel, a broken fence rail, a shipment that needed carrying. He never called it courtship. Maya never asked him to. Some evenings they walked as far as the cottonwoods beside the spring, where the water moved over stone with a sound too steady to belong to any one person. Silas told her about Eleanor's garden and Jonah's stubborn habit of repairing tools that should have been thrown away. Maya told him about Lena Chino, who had carried a deed through smoke and then hidden it beneath a flower bin for half her life. They spoke of the dead without letting grief own the whole conversation. When winter softened into spring, the church held another supper, this time beside the water. Long tables stretched beneath the cottonwoods. Families from Mercy Ridge arrived with pies, beans, roast beef, coffee, and cornbread. Families from Cedar Hollow brought venison stew, squash, dried fruit, and woven blankets for the children sitting on the grass. No table stood apart. No chair had to be removed. Silas arrived late after helping Samuel Hart free a wagon from the mud. He crossed the gathering with dust on his boots and found Maya near the middle of the longest table. Beside her sat one empty chair. On its seat rested the silver spoon, cleaned until the letter R shone, though a dark line from the fire still crossed the handle. Silas stopped beside it. That place taken? Maya looked up. Her expression was calm, but warmth moved behind her eyes. It was saved. He sat down. Reverend Bell began the blessing, naming the spring, the families, and the people who had carried truth when fear made others set it down. When the prayer ended, conversation rose beneath the trees. Silas placed his hand on the table. Maya rested hers beside it. This time there was no space between them. Across the water, children from both communities chased the same red ball along the bank, calling to one another without asking which side they belonged to. Mercy Ridge would remember the night a cowboy chose an empty chair. Silas remembered something else. Maya had entered that church alone, carrying enough truth to humble a town, and still